A presidential primary process is, to my mind, really two different processes at the same time. First, it's a competition to select the candidate, the person that's going to be the nominee to represent the party. But also, crucially, it's the way a party sets its agenda, its policy priorities, the way it finds consensus view of the entire coalition about what it stands for and what it fights for. And you're already seeing that part of the process at work in the Democratic primary right now, well before anyone's casting a vote, particularly on climate. Candidates across the spectrum of the competitors in the primary are competing with various plans to tackle the climate emergency, all of which are, in the context of recent history, really rather ambitious. You're also seeing this primary process play out on reproductive rights. After several candidates, including Elizabeth Warren at our own town hall, criticized Joe Biden for his support of the federal ban on spending for abortion services, he moved towards the consensus view and reversed his position.
We now see so many Republican governors denying health care to millions of the most poorest and most vulnerable Americans by refusing even Medicaid expansion. I can't justify leaving millions of women without access to the care they need and the ability to exercise their constitutionally protected right. If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code.
Talk about where things stand in both of those Democratic primary processes. I'm joined by L. Joy Williams, Democratic strategist, Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root and an MSNBC political analyst, and Bill Scher, contributing editor to Politico magazine and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Joy, you know, I've seen the sort of people talking about the Biden's reversal here. Mm-hmm. It strikes me that at some level it's like, this is exactly what you want. Right? I mean, but in terms of that second part of the process, which is finding consensus about, like, this is what the Democratic Party is in the year 2019, 2020. Like, this is precisely how you want it to work.
Yeah, but it also matters in terms of how you deliver your change. We've been through presidential cycles where we've accused candidates of flip-flopping, and we know how that works. But it also depends on how you demonstrate to who the electorate is going to be, how you evolved on a position, and what made you change that position. Now, he gets on stage and he says that, you know, because of what's happening in the states where Republican governors are restricting, legislatures are restricting, that's why he's changing his mind. But in an atmosphere where the Democratic primary electorate is going to be different, they're demanding more, they want more from their candidates, it's a little difficult to just, you know, say that. You have to say a little bit more.
Although one response to that is that, like, there's the question of, like, who the electorate is, right? Like,
well, that's always the question,
right? Yes. I mean, like,
and you have to be aware of that, of
it's
who
a big
the
group,
Democratic primary electorate is and who you're playing to, and that's something that the Biden campaign is going to have to address throughout the campaign.
Right. Although, Bill, my sense in the Biden campaign's proposition here, and I don't necessarily think this is a bad way for them to see this, is I'm Joe Biden and I can be Donald Trump. In terms of what the Joe Biden presidency will be, it'll be basically whatever the consensus ends up producing of this Democratic primary, and I will go with that agenda.
Well, yes, and I think Biden very much wants to be seen as a mainstream Democrat, but he's also, I think, made the calculation that most Democrats actually define themselves as moderates.
Yes.
Most Democrats say they want politicians who compromise over politicians who stick to their positions no matter what. And that defiance against the left of the party has served him well up until this point, because abortion is not like the other issues.
Well, but I want to follow up on that, because I totally agree with you. I mean, I think there is a disconnect in terms of the ideological positioning of the sort of most intensely active people in this primary this early on and the median voter in the Democratic process in terms of how they self-describe, in terms of those things like compromise. And part of the value proposition of Joe Biden is, like, I can stiff-arm those folks because I'm Joe Biden and I'm going to hew to the center and I know how to win. Why is this issue different?
Right, and his argument that he knows how to win works when he goes toe-to-toe with Trump and Trump doesn't hit the mark. When Trump tries to throw a punch at Biden and it doesn't land, that serves Biden's argument. When Biden zigzags on the Hyde Amendment, as he did these past 48 hours, that makes him look wobbly. So it's less, I mean, partly it's the position, it's partly how he handled it. When he is defiant and strong, that makes people think, you know, that guy knows how to deal with the fire. When he's wobbly, less so.
Although I also sort of, Nick Coffer sort of said this last night, and I think it's true. It's like, no one's going to beat you up for coming to them. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like if you come to the position, it's like, okay, well, welcome. Right. Which was basically what the rest of the field said, which is, look,
the problem with Joe Biden, and this is the whole idea of I can stiff arm these people. And I've always said this. He's always been electable and not viable, right? The guy can't make it through a primary to save his life. But if he ever got to a general election, he's probably a very electable candidate. He's got to remember that you still have a primary, because this is what I saw about the sort of Hyde Act. Okay, great. You came to this position. Will you be able to make that same transformation about the crime bill? Right. Because, see, that's the one. There are several things that Joe Biden has said, I'm not changing my mind on, and that's going to blow up in his face if he doesn't do something like what he did here.
Although the crime bill, to me, which, again, I wrote an entire book on this, and substantively I think was a very bad piece of legislation, and we should note there were lots of people at the time who thought it was a bad piece of legislation. I also think there is some divergence in the crime bill, right? Like, if you poll the most, active folks who are really active in this right now, I don't necessarily think their feeling about the crime bill and whether it's a no-go for them is the same as your median voter in the South Carolina or Nevada primary.
Oh, yeah.
Correct?
Your median voter doesn't really care.
That's my point. Yes.
They're not asking about Anita Hill either. Right?
They don't
care about any of those things.
Beat Trump and then get
correct. But the point is that, if you're the Biden people, that's the thing that's front of mind for them.
Right. And the problem
which is not a crazy theory of the case.
It's not a crazy theory, but it's like you guys, because here's the danger. Can't act like a front runner. You can't act like a front runner.
Exactly.
You still got to remember that you got a race to go on, because if you start looking arrogant, that's when it blows up in your face.
But the other issue is back to our conversation about who the electorate is. And so if the Biden campaign is focusing and thinking that they're going to do a traditional pre-Obama, Democratic primary process where you're speaking yes to the moderate Dem and don't have to really engage with the left, don't have to do anything, then you're losing.
So that's, Bill, this is my point, right? I think their theory of the case is a pretty strong one. And I think this idea that they think, let's project out towards the, let's project out both towards Trump and also the sort of big swaths of the not on Twitter part of the Democratic primary, which is a big, the majority probably, right? They have to come up with a strategy then to deal with the other parts of the sort of policy debate that's happening.
I'm sorry, is that to me?
Yes, it is. Sorry.
What's the question again?
I'm just saying that they have to come up with a strategy to deal with, I think it's a decent theory of the case for them running as the front runner and sort of trying to cover this relatively center of the coalition position and run against Trump. But they have to have a sort of strategy for how they're dealing with all these policy fights that are going to be happening around them.
Well, I think their strategy is, they're going to have their policy rollout. Biden did a climate policy package. Biden has done some economic policy packages before. I don't think he's going to try to rock the boat too much, either towards the right or the left. They don't want to get into a scrap.
That's right.
With the base if they don't have to, but at the same time, they don't want to be pushed around by the base and be forced to apologize time and time again. So it's a fine line to walk, and that's why I think in this case with the Hyde Amendment, Biden wanted to end it as soon as possible.
It's funny when you look at there's scoring GW nominate, right, of where someone is in the caucus. Joe Biden was basically smack dab in the center of the Democratic caucus for his entire career in the U.S. Senate, which shows something, right? That's someone who understands very well where the middle of Democratic consensus politics are, and that's where he aims.
But here's where the Biden campaign has to remember. Yes, it could be that, Twitter is not real life, but Twitter and the conversations and the fights that happen on social media boil over into the media, boil over into the press. And so if you have to fight in that standpoint, and then also that being used against particular pockets like women, like people of color, that is going to be a problem.
There's also 21 people that are aiming at you now. Right. Because you're the front runner, and you've half the Democrats in the entire country running for president. L. Joy Williams, Jason Johnson, and Bill Scher. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we go,